Every country has an origin story, but Portugal's, it's a real puzzle. It's this incredible story of ancient tribes and clashing empires and a global power that all kicked off with a single humble port. And the key to unlocking the whole thing? Well, it's been hiding in the name itself this whole time.
So, to really get how this nation was forged, we have to start with the most basic question of all. Where did the name Portugal even come from? Seriously, because the answer is the thread that's going to guide us through this entire epic tale.
And here it is, our first big clue. The entire nation gets its name from this one place, a settlement called Portugal. Now think about that name for a second. It's a fusion of two completely different worlds. Portus is Latin for port, pretty straightforward, but Cale is thought to be Celtic. This mix, this Roman-Celtic blend, is the perfect place to start, because the story of Portugal is really the story of how this one small spot on the map grew to lend its name to an entire country.
But way before the name, of course, there was the land itself, a piece of Europe's western edge that has been home to a deep and incredibly complex tapestry of peoples for an almost unimaginable amount of time. And when I say unimaginable, I really mean it. The human story here starts a staggering 400,000 years ago. This skull is the oldest human fossil ever found in the region. It's just this profound reminder that we're not talking about a few centuries of history here. We're talking about deep time.
Okay, now let's jump forward, hundreds of thousands of years forward, and the landscape really begins to change. You start to see these complex, organized societies emerge, and they leave their mark with these incredible megalithic structures. These are ancient tombs and monuments that prove a sophisticated culture was absolutely thriving here long before the great empires ever showed up.
By the first millennium BC, this land was a true crossroads, a real melting pot. You had indigenous, pre-Celtic tribes like the Senates living in the south. At the same time, you had these powerful Celtic groups like the Lusitanians and Galiaci who were dominating the interior. And then, all along the coast, you had traders from as far away as Phoenicia setting up shop. It was this dynamic, and often contested, mix of peoples.
That Celtic influence was especially strong up in the north. They developed what's known as the Castro culture, and you can see it right here. I mean, look at these amazing fortified hilltop settlements with their distinctive and incredibly durable round stone houses.
And we get this brilliant, if, let's be honest, pretty biased, glimpse into how outsiders saw them from Roman writers. They were described as fierce, spirited people who lived this life of struggle and celebration. It just paints such a vivid picture of the world the Roman legions were about to march right into. And then, in 218 BC, everything changed. The legions of the Roman Republic arrived on the Iberian Peninsula, and they weren't just here to trade, they were here to conquer. A brand new chapter in this land story was about to be written in iron and stone.
So Rome's conquest took 2 whole centuries, and their rule lasted for nearly 6. But no empire lasts forever. When Rome fell, it didn't just leave behind buildings and roads. It left a massive power vacuum, kicking off a whole new chaotic era. For 600 years, Rome's presence was just transformative. They fought these fierce resistance leaders like Viriatus, but eventually they conquered the entire peninsula, and crucially, they organized it all into provinces, creating the territories of Lusitania and Galicia, which you'll notice roughly correspond to modern-day Portugal. But then look at that last date, 409 AD. The empire was getting weak, and new peoples began to sweep in from the north.
And wow, this comparison just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the orderly, unified provinces of the late Roman Empire. And on the right, chaos, as Germanic tribes poured in, that single unified territory just shattered into a patchwork of competing settlements.
So 2 main Germanic groups really rose to fill this void. In the north, centered around modern-day Braga, were the Suebi, who set up their own kingdom. But the real power players? They were the Visigoths. They expanded from the south, eventually conquered the Suebi, and managed to unify the entire peninsula under their rule from their capital over into Ledo. Now here's the crucial part. During this Visigothic era, the old Roman territory around Portus Calli became known by the Germanic name Portucali. See, the name was evolving, it was becoming more prominent. But, and this is a big but, it was still just a territory, just one piece of a much larger kingdom. For it to become a country, one final dramatic event was needed to completely reset the board. So, this brings us to the final act in our origin story, the catalyst that would completely shatter the Visigothic world and create the conditions for a new, independent nation to finally be forged from the land of Portugal. By the year 700, the Visigothic kingdom looked totally secure. As this map shows, they controlled the whole Iberian Peninsula. But their strength was also a critical weakness. Their rule was so centralized that if you could somehow defeat the king in a single battle, the whole kingdom was incredibly vulnerable.
And in 711 AD, that's exactly what happened. An invading army from the Umayyad Caliphate crossed over from North Africa. In a stunningly short campaign, they defeated the Visigothic king, and in just 7 years, they conquered almost the entire peninsula, which they renamed Al-Andalus.
But not everything was lost. A handful of Visigothic nobles, led by a man named Pelagius, escaped to the rugged mountains of the far north, and from these unconquered strongholds, they launched a resistance. This was the birth of the Reconquista, a struggle to retake the peninsula that would last for nearly 800 years.
Over the next couple of centuries, these small Christian kingdoms in the north began to push south. It was a slow, painstaking process, fighting for every mile, establishing a new frontier, and carving out territories from the lands of Al-Andalus.
And this is it. This is where all the pieces we've been following finally come together. As the Reconquista pushed south, a new county was established in the lands reconquered around that old city of Portugal. And what was it called? You guessed it, the County of Portugal. For over 200 years, it stayed part of a larger Christian kingdom, until 1139. That's when its ambitious count, a guy named Afonso Henriques, took the final, decisive step. He declared himself no longer a count, but the first king of an independent Portugal.
And there it is. The journey was complete. A name that began with a small Roman Celtic port that survived the fall of an empire to become a Germanic county, had through centuries of struggle and reconquest, finally become the name of a nation.
It's an absolutely incredible story. From this single port on the Atlantic coast, an entire identity was forged. An identity that would not only define a nation, but go on to launch a global empire that would forever change the map of the world.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last fascinating question. How did this grand new kingdom, forged in conflict on the very edge of Europe, manage to transform itself into the world's leading naval power and kickstart the age of discovery? Well, that sounds like a story for another time.